Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. In a world that moves so fast, where everyone is scrolling past everyone else's pain, it means everything that you stopped and clicked. Please consider subscribing if you want to help me raise my voice. Michael was 2 years old when his father died. A car accident on Interstate 95 just outside Richmond, Virginia, on a rainy night in November 1998. One moment, Tom was driving home from a business trip to Charlotte. In the next, he was gone. The police officer who came to my door that night had kind eyes, the kind that had delivered terrible news before and learned how to soften his voice, how to stand at a respectful distance. But his words were a blur of accident and sorry for your loss, and no suffering. All I remember clearly is the cold, the way my legs gave out, and the sound of Michael crying in his crib upstairs, as if he somehow knew his world had just changed forever. I was 28 years old, and suddenly I was alone with a toddler and a future I hadn't planned for. People told me I was strong. Tom's family, my family, our friends, they all said I was brave, that I was doing an amazing job, that Tom would be proud. But I didn't feel strong. I felt like I was drowning every single day, clinging to wreckage in the middle of the ocean, trying desperately to keep my head above water for Michael's sake. The life insurance helped, but it wasn't enough for me to stop working. I had a job as a receptionist at a dental office in Henrico, answering phones and scheduling appointments and filing insurance claims. It paid okay, but not great. So I took a second job cleaning offices downtown at night, working from 7 to midnight while my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, watched Michael. I'd come home exhausted, check on my sleeping son, and collapse into bed for 5 hours before doing it all over again. I barely slept. I lived on coffee and the hope that things would get better once Michael was older, once I could breathe again, once the grief wasn't quite so sharp and constant. I didn't date. I didn't have time, and honestly, I didn't have the energy or the desire. My life was Michael, his pediatrician appointments, his daycare, his first words and first steps, later, his school projects and soccer practices and homework assignments. I drove him to games on Saturday mornings, made his lunches every evening, stayed up late helping him study for tests. I volunteered in his classroom when I could, went to every parent-teacher conference, cheered at every spelling bee and science fair. I saved every penny I could, putting it away in a savings account for his college fund. I skipped buying new clothes for myself, drove my car long past when it should have been replaced, ate simply so Michael could have the things he needed. Birthday parties, new shoes when he grew out of the old ones, the school field trips I didn't want him to miss. When Michael graduated high school in 2014, I cried. Not just because I was proud, though I was incredibly proud. He'd worked hard, maintained good grades, stayed out of trouble, but I cried because we'd made it. Against all odds, we'd made it. He'd gotten into Virginia Tech, his dream school, with a partial academic scholarship. The rest, about $15,000 a year, I paid for with the college fund I'd built and a second mortgage on the small house in Henrico I'd bought years earlier. He called me every week during his first semester. We'd talk for an hour sometimes, him telling me about his classes, his roommate, the campus, the freedom of being on his own. I loved those calls. They made the empty house feel a little less empty, made all the years of sacrifice feel worth it. But by his second year, the calls became less frequent. Once a week became every 2 weeks, then once a month. I told myself it was normal, that he was busy with classes and friends and his part-time job at the campus bookstore. He was building his own life, becoming his own person. That's what I'd raised him to do, after all. I just didn't realize how little I'd be a part of that life once it was built. Michael graduated in 2018 with a degree in business administration. He'd done well, made connections, landed a job at a tech company in Northern Virginia, doing something in marketing that I didn't fully understand despite him trying to explain it several times. He moved into an apartment in Arlington with 2 roommates, and I saw him less and less. Holidays mostly. Christmas and Thanksgiving. Sometimes Easter if he wasn't too busy. Sometimes not even then. I tried not to take it personally. He was 22, starting his career, building his adult life. This was what success looked like. I should be happy, and I was happy for him. But I was also lonely in a way I hadn't been since the early days after Tom died. In 2019, Michael started dating a woman named Bethany. She worked in finance, something with investment portfolios and corporate accounts. He brought her to Thanksgiving dinner at my house that year, their first visit together. She was pretty and polished, wearing expensive clothes and carrying a designer handbag. She smiled and said all the right things, complimented my cooking, and asked polite questions about my life. But there was something cold in her eyes, something calculating, and I felt uneasy around her in a way I couldn't quite name. They got engaged a year later, in October 2020. Michael called to tell me, his voice full of excitement. She said, "Yes, Mom. Can you believe it? We're getting married." I was happy for him. I truly was. But I also felt a strange, creeping sadness that I didn't fully understand. Maybe it was just the feeling of losing him completely, of knowing that I was no longer the most important woman in his life. That's natural, I told myself. That's how it should be. The wedding was planned for June 2021, a big, expensive affair at a vineyard in Charlottesville. Michael and Bethany were paying for most of it, but there were expenses they asked me to help with. The rehearsal dinner, part of the catering, some of the flowers. I paid for what I could, even though I couldn't really afford it. I was still working at the dental office, my hours reduced as the practice downsized. Money was tight. But he was my son. This was his wedding. It's what mothers do. The wedding itself was beautiful in the way expensive things often are. The vineyard was picturesque, rolling hills covered in grapevines under a clear June sky. There were 200 guests, most of whom I didn't know. Bethany's family was there in force, loud and confident, talking about their vacation homes in Florida and the Carolinas, their investment properties, their financial strategies. They were the kind of people who made wealth look effortless. I felt out of place in my department store dress, the nicest one I owned, but still clearly cheap compared to what everyone else was wearing. I nursed a glass of wine in the corner during the reception, watching Michael and Bethany dance, watching them mingle with guests, watching them start their new life together. Michael barely spoke to me that night. He was too busy with Bethany's family, with his college friends, with his new in-laws. I understood, I told myself. He was the groom. He had a lot of people to talk to. But I went home that night feeling invisible, feeling like I'd somehow already been written out of his story. After the wedding, things changed even more dramatically. Michael stopped calling almost entirely. He stopped visiting. When I reached out, his responses were brief and distracted. "Sorry, Mom, things are crazy at work. We'll try to come by soon. Bethany and I are really busy with the new apartment." They'd moved into a nicer place in Arlington, a 2-bedroom condo that cost more per month than I made in 3. I saw photos of it on social media, sleek and modern with stainless steel appliances and floor-to-ceiling windows. I told myself he was just busy. Newlyweds needed time to adjust to married life. He'd come around eventually. But months passed, and he didn't. In early 2022, I started having trouble with my knees. Years of working on my feet, first at the dental office, and then all those years cleaning offices at night had taken their toll. The pain got progressively worse until I could barely walk. My doctor said I needed surgery, both knees, one at a time. I called Michael to let him know, hoping he'd offer to help, or at least visit during my recovery. "That's tough, Mom," he said, and I could hear the distraction in his voice, like he was doing something else while talking to me. but I'm sure you'll be fine. You're strong. You've always been strong. I'm having surgery on Tuesday, I said, at Henrico Doctors Hospital. I'll be there a few days. Okay, he said. Well, good luck. Let me know how it goes. He didn't come to the hospital. He didn't call after the surgery to see how I was doing. 3 days later, Bethany sent a text message. Hope you're feeling better, followed by a flower emoji. I recovered alone in my small house, limping from room to room, relying on Mrs. Chen and a few other neighbors to bring me groceries and help with things I couldn't manage. The loneliness was crushing, worse than it had been in years. But I told myself Michael was busy. He had his own life now. I couldn't expect him to drop everything for me. By late 2022, I was struggling financially. My hours at the dental office had been cut even further. The second mortgage I'd taken out for Michael's college was crushing me, and I was falling behind on payments. My credit cards were maxed out. I was choosing between medications and groceries, heat and electricity. Finally, in January 2023, I swallowed my pride and called Michael. I need help, I said, and my voice broke despite my best efforts to stay calm. I'm falling behind on bills. I don't know what else to do. There was a long pause. I don't know what you want me to do, Mom, he said, and there was an edge of frustration in his voice that I'd never heard directed at me before. Bethany and I have our own expenses. We're trying to save for a house. I can't just give you money. I'm not asking for much, I said, tears streaming down my face now. Just a little help until I can get back on my feet. Maybe a few $100 a month. I'll pay you back. Another pause. I'll see what I can do, he said, and hung up. He sent me $500 a week later through a money transfer app. No note, no phone call, just the money. It wasn't enough, but I didn't ask for more. I was too ashamed, too hurt. Things got worse. In September 2023, I had a minor stroke. I was at home trying to make dinner when suddenly the left side of my body went numb and my vision blurred. I managed to call 911 before I collapsed. I spent 3 days in the hospital while doctors ran tests and started me on blood thinners and blood pressure medication. The stroke wasn't severe, they said. I'd likely make a full recovery with physical therapy and lifestyle changes. But it left me weaker, more forgetful, more easily exhausted. This time, Michael did come to the hospital. But he didn't come alone. Bethany was with him, dressed in a business suit like she'd come straight from work. And there was a man with them, someone Michael introduced as a consultant. His name was Robert something, and he had the bland, professional demeanor of someone who worked in elder care or medical administration. They sat in my hospital room, talking in low voices while I lay there in the bed, still groggy from medication, trying to understand what was happening. Mom, we've been talking, Michael said finally, pulling his chair closer to the bed. And we think it's time you considered some different living arrangements. I blinked at him, confused. What do you mean? You're not safe living alone anymore, Bethany said, her voice syrupy sweet in the way that very fake people sound. You had a stroke. What if it happens again? What if you fall and no one's there to help you? You could lie there for hours, days even. I'm fine, I said, though even I could hear how weak my voice sounded. I just need some time to recover. I'll be more careful. Mom, you had a stroke, Michael said, and he looked genuinely concerned, though whether it was concern for me or concern about the inconvenience I might cause him, I wasn't sure. What if it's worse next time? You're 61 years old. You can't keep living alone in that house. I'll get one of those alert buttons, I said, grasping for solutions. The ones you wear around your neck. If something happens, I can press it and they'll send help. But Michael was shaking his head. That's not enough. We've already looked into some options. There's a facility in Fairfax, a really nice assisted living community. They have nurses on staff 24 hours a day, activities, everything you'd need. You'd be safe there. A facility? I stared at him. You mean a nursing home? It's not a nursing home, Bethany corrected, as if the terminology made any difference. It's an assisted living community. Very nice, very modern. We toured it last week. The rooms are lovely, and the staff is wonderful. You toured it last week. They'd been planning this before I even had the stroke, I realized. They'd already made decisions about my life without talking to me. I'm 61 years old, I said, and I could hear my voice rising, getting shaky. I don't need a nursing home. I had a minor stroke. People recover from strokes all the time and live independently for decades. Mom, please, Michael said, and he reached for my hand. I pulled it away. We're just trying to do what's best for you. We're worried about you. We don't want something terrible to happen because you were too stubborn to accept help. Too stubborn. As if my desire to remain independent, to live in my own home, was some kind of character flaw. I'll think about it, I said, because I was too tired and weak to argue, and some part of me, the part that had spent 25 years putting Michael's needs first, didn't want to upset him. Thank you, he said, relief flooding his face. You'll see. This is the right decision. They moved me into Meadowbrook Assisted Living 2 weeks later. I didn't really agree to go, not exactly, but I was worn down, weak from the stroke, overwhelmed by medical bills and the threat of foreclosure on my house. Michael kept saying it was temporary, just until I got stronger, just until we figured out a better long-term solution. And I wanted to believe him. The facility was exactly what you'd expect. A large institutional building on the edge of Fairfax County, surrounded by a chain-link fence dressed up with vinyl slats to make it look less prison-like. There was a sad little garden in the center, courtyard, some roses and a few benches where residents could sit if they were mobile enough. My room was on the second floor. It was small, maybe 12 by 14 feet, with a narrow bed, a dresser, a chair, and a window that looked out onto the parking lot. The walls were beige. The floor was linoleum designed to look like wood. There was a small bathroom attached, barely big enough to turn around in. Michael and Bethany helped me unpack, though helped is generous. Bethany mostly stood by the door checking her phone while Michael set a few boxes on the floor and looked uncomfortable. We'll come visit soon, okay? He said, giving me an awkward hug. You get settled in, and we'll be back in a few days. They didn't come back in a few days, or a few weeks. The first month at Meadowbrook was the hardest. I was the youngest person there by at least 15 years. Most of the other residents were in their late 70s or 80s, many of them suffering from dementia or severe mobility issues. They were kind people, sweet people, but they weren't my peers. I didn't belong there. The days were long and monotonous. Breakfast in the dining hall at 7:30, morning activities, usually things like bingo or simple crafts, lunch at noon, afternoon rest time, dinner at 5, evening television in the common room, lights out by 9. I tried calling Michael multiple times a week at first, but he rarely answered. When he did, the conversations were brief and surface level. How are you, Mom? I'm okay. I miss being home. That's good. Listen, I'm actually really busy right now. Can I call you back later? He never called back. I tried asking when I could go home, when we could talk about other arrangements. He was always vague. Soon. We're working on it. Just focus on getting better. But I was better. The stroke had been minor. I'd completed physical therapy. I could walk fine, think clearly, take care of myself. There was no medical reason for me to be there, but I couldn't leave on my own because Michael had convinced me to sign some paperwork when I first arrived, something I'd been too foggy and overwhelmed to read carefully. papers that gave him medical power of attorney, that made him responsible for my care decisions. I realized too late that I'd given away my freedom. The months blurred together. Fall turned to winter, then to spring. I fell into the routine of the facility because there was nothing else to do. I ate the bland food they served. I went to the activities, even though they felt insulting in their simplicity. I sat in the courtyard garden when the weather was nice, reading books from the small library. And I waited for Michael to visit. In December 2023, one of the nurses mentioned something in passing. Her name was Gloria, and she was one of the few staff members who treated me like a person rather than a patient to be managed. "Your son and his wife just bought a house, didn't they?" she said while checking my blood pressure. "I saw it on Facebook. Beautiful place." I didn't have Facebook. Michael had told me years ago that it was too complicated, that I wouldn't understand it, that I didn't need it. But I asked Gloria to show me. She pulled out her phone and navigated to Michael's page, and there it was, posted just 2 days earlier. Photos of a sprawling house in Ashburn, a new development with modern architecture and big windows and a 3-car garage. The caption read, "Grateful for this new chapter in our lives. Dreams really do come true. Blessed, we're new home, fresh start." The house looked like it cost at least $600,000, probably more. I stared at the photos, my chest tight, my hands shaking. They'd bought a house, a big, expensive house, while I was living in a nursing home at 61 years old, sleeping in a room the size of a closet, eating institutional food, losing myself a little more every day. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Gloria said, smiling. I nodded, unable to speak. After she left, I sat on my narrow bed and cried, not because I begrudged Michael having a nice house. I'd always wanted him to be successful, to have a good life. That's why I'd worked 2 jobs, why I'd sacrificed, why I'd given him everything I had. I cried because I finally understood. They'd put me here to save money, to avoid having to help me financially, to avoid having to worry about me. They'd taken the burden of caring for me, the expense of it, and transferred it to Medicaid and this facility. And with me out of the way, safely contained, they could spend their money on themselves. I'd given Michael everything, and he'd given me nothing in return except abandonment. But I didn't give up. Over the next few months, I worked on getting stronger. I did extra physical therapy. Even though it hurt, I forced myself to eat better, to stay mentally sharp, to prove that I didn't belong there. I requested evaluations from my doctors, pushed for assessments that would show I was capable of independent living. By May 2024, I had what I needed. Medical documentation that I was physically and mentally capable of living on my own. My doctor at the facility, Dr. Ramesh, agreed that I no longer needed assisted living. I called Michael to tell him. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I'd prepared what I wanted to say. "I'm leaving Meadowbrook," I said, when he finally answered after the 4th ring. "Dr. Ramesh has cleared me. I don't need to be here anymore. I'm going back to living independently." There was a long pause. "Mom, I don't think that's a good idea. You're safe where you are. You have people looking out for you." "I don't need people looking out for me," I said, keeping my voice firm. "I'm 61 years old and in good health. The stroke was over a year ago. I've recovered. There's no reason for me to be in a facility." "Where will you go?" he asked, and I could hear the edge in his voice. "You can't go back to the house. We sold it." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You what?" "We sold the house," he repeated, more confidently now. "Last fall. We needed to. The mortgage was in default, and it was going to go into foreclosure. We sold it to pay off what was owed. There wasn't much left after that." "You sold my house," I said, and I could barely breathe. "You sold my house without telling me? You signed paperwork giving me power of attorney over your financial affairs." he said defensively. It was the responsible thing to do. We were trying to protect what little equity you had left. Where's the money? I asked. It's in an account for your care. Then I want it, I said. I'll use it to get a new place, an apartment, something small. Mom, that money has to last. It's for your long-term care. We can't just give it to you to waste on rent. It's my money, I said, my voice rising. From my house. You have no right to keep it from me. Legally, I do, he said, and his voice was cold now, all pretense of concern gone. You signed the papers. I'm acting in your best interest, and in my judgment, you're safer and better cared for at Meadowbrook. Your judgment, I repeated. You haven't visited me in 6 months, Michael. You don't call. You don't check on me. You have no idea how I'm doing or what I need. How dare you claim you're acting in my best interest? I don't have to explain myself to you, he said. I'm doing what needs to be done. If you can't see that, then maybe you're not as healthy as you think. He hung up. I sat there in my small room, holding the phone, shaking with rage and grief and disbelief. My son, the child I'd raised alone, the one I'd sacrificed everything for, had stolen my house, stolen my money, and locked me away in a facility so he didn't have to deal with me. But I wasn't going to accept it. I contacted a legal aid organization that served low-income seniors. I explained my situation to a lawyer named James Harper. He listened carefully, took notes, and asked to see all the paperwork I'd signed. I didn't have copies, but he was able to request them from Meadowbrook and from Michael, and when he reviewed them, he frowned. Mrs. Caldwell, some of these documents may not be legally valid, he said. You signed them while you were in a weakened medical state, possibly under duress. And more importantly, your son has a clear conflict of interest. He's benefiting financially from keeping you in this facility and controlling your assets. We can challenge this. We filed a petition to revoke Michael's power of attorney and to have my competency evaluated by an independent medical professional. The court appointed a geriatric specialist who came to Meadowbrook to assess me. She spent 3 hours talking to me, testing my memory, my reasoning ability, my understanding of my situation. A week later, I got the results. I was fully competent. There was no medical or legal justification for someone else to have power of attorney over my affairs. The court hearing was in September 2024. Michael and Bethany both attended, sitting on the opposite side of the courtroom with their own lawyer. Michael looked angry and defensive. Bethany looked annoyed, like this was a waste of her time. James presented the medical evaluation, the testimony from Dr. Ramesh and the geriatric specialist, and documentation showing that I'd been essentially imprisoned in a facility I didn't need. He also presented financial records showing that Michael had used money from the sale of my house to help with the down payment on his own house. Michael's lawyer tried to argue that he'd been acting responsibly, that he'd been trying to protect me and ensure I had long-term care. But the judge wasn't buying it. Mr. Caldwell, you may have started with good intentions, but it's clear you've been acting in your own financial interest rather than your mother's, the judge said. The power of attorney is revoked, effective immediately. Mrs. Caldwell is to be given full control over her remaining assets. You are ordered to provide a full accounting of all funds from the sale of her property and to return any portion used for personal expenses. I won. Michael was ordered to repay nearly $40,000 he'd used from my house sale for his own down payment. It took months to actually get the money, but eventually it came through. I used it to rent a small apartment in Richmond, a one-bedroom place in an older building with big windows and hardwood floors. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. I got a part-time job at a bookstore, just enough to supplement my Social Security and pay the bills. I started volunteering at a community center, helping other seniors navigate legal issues and Medicare. And I didn't contact Michael. I didn't call, didn't text, didn't send emails. If he wanted to be in my life, he would have to make the effort. He would have to apologize. He would have to acknowledge what he'd done. He didn't. A year passed. I built a quiet life for myself. I made friends at the bookstore and the community center. I joined a book club, started taking yoga classes at the senior center. I wasn't wealthy, but I was happy, or as close to it as I could manage after everything that had happened. In November 2025, almost exactly 27 years after Tom died, I got a phone call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mom?" It was Michael, and his voice sounded strange, strained. "Yes? I wanted to check in, see how you're doing." I didn't respond right away. I let the silence sit between us, heavy and uncomfortable. "I know it's been a while," he continued, "but Bethany and I were talking, and we thought maybe we could visit, if that's okay with you." "Why?" I asked. "Because you're my mom," he said, and his voice cracked slightly. "And I miss you. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I want to try to make things right." I wanted to believe him. Some small part of me, the part that had loved him since the moment he was born, wanted to think that maybe he'd finally realized what he'd done, that maybe he was genuinely sorry. But I wasn't that naive anymore. "What do you really want, Michael?" I asked quietly. "I want to see you," he said. "I want to apologize in person." "No," I said. "Mom, please." "I spent 25 years putting you first," I said, and my voice was steady, calm, final. "I worked 2 jobs to give you a good life. I sacrificed everything so you could go to college, so you could build a career, so you could have the opportunities I never did. And when I needed you, when I needed just a fraction of the support I gave you your entire life, you threw me away. You stole from me. You locked me in a facility like I was an inconvenience to be managed." "I'm sorry," he said, and he was crying now. "I'm so sorry. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. Please." "You can't undo what you did," I said. "You can't give me back the year I spent in that place. You can't give me back my house, my savings, my sense of security. You took all of that, Michael. You and Bethany took it so you could buy your dream house and your perfect life. And now you want me to forgive you? Why? Because you feel guilty? Because you want to feel better about yourself?" "No, I don't need your apology," I said. "And I don't need you in my life. I've built something new, something that belongs to me, and I won't let you take anything else from me. Not my peace, not my energy, not my forgiveness. You don't get those things." "Mom," I hung up. I sat there in my small apartment, the phone still in my hand, and I felt something unexpected. Not anger, not sadness, just peace. I'd spent so much of my life being a mother, defining myself by that role. And I'd been a good mother. I'd given Michael everything I had. But he taught me a hard lesson. Sometimes the people you love most, the ones you sacrifice everything for, don't deserve what you've given them. And sometimes you have to choose yourself instead. I chose myself. I set the phone down and walked to the window. It was late afternoon, and the light was golden, slanting through the buildings and painting everything warm. Below, I could see people walking, living their lives, moving forward. I thought about Tom, about how young we'd been when he died, how much life we'd planned to have together. I thought about the exhausted young woman I'd been, working 2 jobs and raising a child alone. I thought about all the years of trying so hard, sacrificing so much, and I thought about the woman I was now, older, scarred by experience, but finally free. I didn't need Michael's love. I didn't need his approval or his apology or his presence in my life. I just needed to know that I'd survived, that I'd built something with my own hands, that I'd chosen my own peace over his convenience. And I had. Outside, the sun continued to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful in the way endings often are, bittersweet but honest. I turned away from the window and went to make myself dinner. Something simple, something I liked, just for me, and that was enough.